Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, diplomacy deadlock. President Trump says he is not looking for a ceasefire with Iran as U.S. troop deployments ramp up in the region, complicating diplomacy and heightening the risk of a broader conflict. Plus, straight talk. President Trump ramping up pressure on U.S. allies over the Strait of Hormuz, questioning NATO's resolve as his team weighs a potential move on Karg Island. We'll break down the military risks with retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, who commanded a destroyer squadron in the U.S. Navy. And no end in sight. Fears of a broader Middle East escalation fueling angst on Wall Street, accelerating losses into the close. The S&P 500 down 1.5%, closing out its fourth straight week of losses. Brent crude hitting $112 a barrel. And we begin with the breaking news out of the White House, with President Trump saying moments ago on his way out of town he does not want a ceasefire. Quote, "You don't do a ceasefire when you're literally obliterating the other side." Now, this follows a Bloomberg exclusive in which Iran says it's unwilling to even talk about reopening the Strait of Hormuz while it's being attacked by U.S. and Israeli forces. That, according to a person involved in the high-level talks with Tehran, that piece of news impacting both financial and energy markets today. And we're going to have more on that in just a moment. One important question this evening that increasingly is being asked here in the Capitol: will there soon be American troops on Iranian soil? The president was asked about that a few moments ago. Have a listen to his response.
If I told you the answer to that question, my military people wouldn't be very happy. But we have a lot of troops. We have unlimited ammunition. We have the greatest equipment in the world. And we are decimating Iran. It's about time. And frankly, it should have been done long before me.
And that might involve a plan to seize Karg Island, the critical 5-mile piece of land that serves as Iran's oil export gateway, just 15 miles off the coastline, considered its economic lifeline for oil. Bloomberg's Courtney Subramanian joins us now live from the North Lawn at the White House with the latest on this. Ground troops are still on the table, Courtney?
Yeah, there's been a lot of mixed messaging from this president. We heard from him yesterday when he was asked this, and he said there would be no American troops in Iran. And then, of course, today, he mentioned, today we have this reporting that the U.S. is planning to send 3 warships as well as thousands of Marines to the Middle East. And that, of course, that undertaking would take weeks, which certainly stands in conflict with the 4 to 6 week timeline that this White House has been using about how long this campaign could last. So it really raises fresh questions just about the length and scope of this ongoing operation.
Well, that's for sure, with reports suggesting that the administration is considering occupying Karg Island, which would introduce a number of other factors. The president, though, also suggesting that and saying, I guess, flat out, Courtney, that he's not interested in a ceasefire. When you couple that with the request for $200 billion in supplemental funding that we expect from the administration, is this a president who's preparing for a longer war?
It's the question we keep asking, of course. And I would also note he was evasive about Karg Island when he was asked about this today. I think it's notable that he was traveling with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to Florida. Yeah. I'm sure that will be the #1 priority in discussing what's next for this campaign.
Bloomberg's Courtney Subramanian reporting live from the White House. Courtney, thank you so much, with imagery that we're showing you on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube of an A-10 Warthog refueling. Those A-10s, those gunship aircraft, are being used right now along with Apache helicopters in the Strait of Hormuz, which remains closed, at least largely, for our interests. And we turn now to the market reaction today, with Wall Street suffering its worst week across assets since the war began. Power moves now with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who joins us live from New York. Nora?
Well, Joe, it's hard to find a little bit of green on the screen. Take a look at the S&P 500, NASDAQ 100, Dow Jones Industrial Average. Even those small cap Russell 2000 stocks all lower on the week. As you mentioned, we did see a pretty substantial slide in the S&P 500. It ended the week at its worst, its longest losing streak on a weekly basis in about a year. Of course, a lot of those fears about an escalation of the tensions in the Middle East really weighing on investors' minds in this moment. We did see oil spiking, of course. We are still continuing to see oil surging, whether it be WTI or Brent crude as well. And as we think about the impact here for the consumer, we, of course, are also continuing to keep our eyes on the prices of gas at the pump. Take a look at unleaded gas, also spiking. So we're still continuing to see how this will really play out as it relates to further implications, with a lot of investors really concerned about the economic impact here. But an area where we do see some green on the screen is the U.S. Dollar. We are seeing that a bit higher right now as we keep an eye on that. Volatility still, of course, here in the market. I'm looking at the VIX at about just above the 26 handle. But take a look at some of the activity that we are seeing in some of those precious metals. I've got my eyes on gold here. We see gold lower by about 3%. We do see spot gold trading at about 3% lower. Spot silver also in focus, and Bitcoin. We also see this as an area that we know continues to be a speculative sector here. We do see Bitcoin lower by about 0.4%, or even less than 1%, excuse me. So a lot of this really trickling out into how people are viewing the broader market right now as we think about how long this conflict may prolong and the impact that it may have as it ricochets across multiple asset classes in the market.
And a market clearly reluctant to go long into the weekend with so much news that could break at any moment here. Nora, one of the worst charts, even after everything you said, that we looked at today was super micro. And this is a story that hits home for us in Washington with so much conversation about export controls. 3 people associated with the company indicted for helping to smuggle NVIDIA AI chips into China. And it looks like we have at least one resignation from the board. What's Wall Street think?
Well, one of the key players resigning in the post-market trade. We are seeing the stock higher by more than 2% as we see the after-hours trading activity. But take a look at the activity that we've seen not only today on a weekly scope. This was the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 this week. And a lot of that coming from today's double-digit decline, the stock falling more than 30% as people try to grapple with what this means for the outlook of this company. Of course, while we do know that this is a stock that's been performing quite well, if you take a look, just flashing back to Thursday's close, the stock was up about 5% year to date. But right now, it's really difficult for a lot of investors to really think about the long-term outlook with this company, given the fact that there is, of course, some legal overhangs here, Joe.
All right, Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, have a great weekend. Joining us now with more is retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, a former destroyer squadron commander in the U.S. Navy and now senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Admiral, it's great to see you, and welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Your thoughts today as we consider the idea of ground troops or maybe a higher level of intensity in this conflict. The USS Abraham Lincoln and Jerry Ford are, of course, already in theater. The Tripoli is on its way from the South China Sea. The USS Boxer just left port in San Diego. Is this the scale of force to gird for a longer war? How do you read these moves?
You know, I agree. We are increasing our number of ships that are involved. Particularly, I think you're going to see more destroyers coming in quietly because they're going to be critical to a convoy operations when we begin them. You mentioned the amphibious readiness group, the 3 amphibious ships, 2,200 Marines, a couple thousand sailors. That's the big news. I will say there's a lot of reasons you'd bring that into the Central Command other than invading Cargill. And in other words, there's other reasons you might have it. I would give you, we have something called non-combatant evacuation operations, where we use these ARGs to remove, to stabilize the situation around an embassy and remove the U.S. embassy staff or remove U.S. citizens who find themselves in extremis in the Middle East. That would be a good reason to have an amphibious readiness group there. I'm very concerned about the other option, which is using them around Cargill, because I think that is going to be a significant, what we call risk to force.
Okay, interesting. It's going to take them some time to get there, obviously. In fact, the ship that left San Diego today probably won't arrive until mid-April. Is that how long we should start preparing ourselves to wait for the Strait of Hormuz to potentially reopen?
I think it's realistic to say that the air campaign has always been advertised as 4 to 5 weeks. So that would be, the first week of April. I think you then got to get at that point, you've lowered the risk to the military mission of convoying. That's the whole goal of the air campaign. So Admiral Cooper, the Central Command Commander, says, now I'll sweep it, check for mines, And while I'm doing that, I'll set up all the conditions so that I can begin convoy operations immediately then. So that would be another, week or 2 weeks, and then you're convoying. You can compress some of that if you've determined there hasn't been mining and things like that. But we should prepare for this. And then the convoy operations don't start out 40 ships a day. They start out at small groups of 3 or 4 ships, maybe twice a day. We could get through the VLCCs, those very large containers with 2 million barrels of oil each. We could really relax the problem with just a couple of those smaller convoys. But overall, the 300 ships that are backed up in the Arabian Gulf are going to take some time to clear.
Does taking the island, if we did land at Karg Island, pressure the Iranians to open the strait? And if so, how many troops, how many Marines would that require?
So making Karg Island not function as a oil terminal would really affect, would affect the Iranian economy and obviously eventually affect their leadership. There's a lot of ways to do it besides putting 800 troops on there or 1,600 troops or whatever it requires. What I would suggest is we can say to the next ship to go to the Karg Island pier, we will sink you 10 minutes out from the pier. And then as someone starts to approach, some Iranian shadow fleet, merchant, we say, you have 5 minutes to turn around. And at the end of that 5 minutes, if they're still trying to go to the pier, they're a lawful combatant, and we can disable that ship or sink it. And when we do that, I'm pretty sure all the other merchant ships are going to go, you know what? It's time to stop going to Karg Island for fueling. And so we can achieve this, in my mind, without risking the troops on the ground.
And you wouldn't need a no-fly zone, for instance, for force protection?
That's right. Exactly. You remove all that secondary and tertiary support. We need destroyers to do convoy operations, not to defend Karg Island, troops on Karg Island.
Yeah. So, Admiral, talk to us about what we need. I'm sure you've heard the conversation about a supplemental budget request that's anticipated on Capitol Hill. The number that's being knocked around has made its way all the way up to $200 billion. And we talked to Leon Panetta, the former Secretary of Defense, CIA Director, and White House Chief of Staff, among other positions he's held here in Washington, about what exactly we would be buying and what we need at this moment. Admiral, here's what he told us.
When you go after 7,000 targets and you're continuing to do attacks, that it's wearing down our supplies. It looks like with that price tag that they're not only looking at replenishing, but trying to add to our supplies and our weapons for the future as well. So it's not going to be an easy sell on Capitol Hill, because this is the moment where the Congress does have the power of the purse. And so I'm sure they're going to be asking a lot of questions about exactly what the status of the war is and how long this war is going to continue into the future.
As a former admiral who commanded a destroyer squadron, what do you make of that? And do you believe $200 billion is the right number? And what would that mean for timeline here? What are we gearing up for?
And I also used to work for Senator John McCain, and he would not like that number, because I think if you sharpen your pencil, Secretary Panetta is right. It's about munitions. And I imagine the munitions over 4 weeks are going to be 20 to 25 billion. That isn't just buying replacements. It's buying new things that are instead of the older ones you fired. So there's a little bit of cost, there could be cost increases and decreases in that. And I think the operational costs will be another 10 to 15 billion. That's operating all these planes and ships over a few months. And then on top of that, there's a little bit of losses. We've lost 4 aircraft and some radars. So you got to replace those. So, I mean, I could easily get myself to 50 billion without working too hard. The 200 billion strikes me as, and some other stuff.
I want to ask you about some of the rhetoric that we've heard from the president when it comes to what is required to reopen the strait. He's suggested that we can do this on our own, even though he has chastised our allies for not showing up to help, suggesting today that it was a very simple military operation. It just required the scale that our allies might be able to help provide. We started looking through the fleets at some of the more obvious members here, and it just might not be there, as a matter of fact. Beyond some of the numbers here, Canada has a destroyer contingent of 15. France is the only other country with 10 or more destroyers. Turkey has all frigates. Do they even have the hardware to help us?
So, I think we're learning here what it's like if you treat your allies poorly for 14 months. They don't come running, and they didn't, and that was inappropriate. They should have come. Now, I will say it's unusual we didn't make this ask on day one because there's two things. I get the president's right. You don't tell him ahead of time. I don't think you could have kept surprise. But after the first day, you talk to him, and there's two things I would have asked for: minesweepers and what you mentioned, air defense capable destroyers. A bunch of our European partners have good. I'm here in Lithuania. The Lithuanians, the Poles, the Estonians, the Brits, the Germans all have very good minesweepers that could help. The Japanese have good minesweepers. They all are going to take about 30 days to get there now that we're asking. And many of these countries are going to provide them. The air defense destroyers, you got it right. I think, the ones that I think are most valuable are Japan, Korea, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Potentially France. Almost all the other ones you list on there are ones that I don't think I trust in an air defense environment like you implied with Turkey. And so I think that's 4 or 5 countries. I'd be disappointed if the Australians, they fought alongside us in every war since we made our relations in 1908 with them. And they have good air defense destroyers, and they have interests in the Middle East.
Well, I really appreciate the insights, Admiral, and the fact that you stayed up late for us tonight in Lithuania. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We thank you. Coming up, we're wrapping up another volatile session, as we've established here, for oil. As the war in Iran now stretches into its 3rd week, we're going to discuss the long-term implications here with Kevin Book of ClearView Energy Partners. He's up next, only on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's a simple military maneuver. It's relatively safe, but you need a lot of help in the sense of you need ships, you need volume. And NATO could help us, but they so far haven't had the courage to do so. And others could help us, but, we don't use it. At a certain point, it'll open itself at a certain point. But we've defeated the enemy.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we heard from President Trump speaking to reporters right before he got on Marine One, telling the press the Strait of Hormuz would, quote, at a certain point, open up itself. We're getting very close to meeting our objectives, as he said here in a truth post that just hit. And this is something we want to get to. It's a redhead on the terminal after what you just heard the president say in the driveway outside the White House. He adds, we're getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East with respect to the terrorist regime of Iran. He runs through 5 points here that he has talked about before in terms of degrading the military, eliminating Navy, Air Force, never allowing Iran to get close to nuclear capability. And then he drops a very interesting line. The Hormuz Strait will have to be guarded and policed, he says, as necessary by other nations who use it. The United States does not, exclamation point. If asked, we will help these countries in their Hormuz efforts, he says, but it shouldn't be necessary once the Iran threat is eradicated. Joining us now here in our Washington studios for some reaction is Kevin Book. He's managing director at ClearView Energy Partners and is steeped in the oil patch and having watched everything we've seen in the past couple of weeks. It's great to have you with us on set. Thanks for joining us. Here. He just made this post as you were sitting down with me in the studio, so I realized you weren't prepared to talk about it. What should be or will be the reaction in the energy market to this?
Well, molecules are one thing and markets are another. Yeah. So if the cargoes we're talking about are the ones that are mostly headed to Asia, and about 80% of the Hormuz traffic from a crude oil perspective is going to Asia, then you still have to think about the global price implications of a shut strait. And that washes ashore on our coasts, despite where those molecules are going.
The president has said this quite a few times recently. We don't even use the strait, but this is a global market, of course. Could there be a world in which the president, I know he has said he's not interested now, cuts off exports from this country and creates some sort of domestic pricing structure?
Well, I think the news we heard this week is that they're not planning to do that.
Yeah.
When we say exports, let's differentiate.
Would it even be possible?
Well, yeah, it certainly, I think, could be possible. The powers in IEEPA might not be well suited to setting tariffs on counterparties, but it could certainly be used to block exports, and those things were mentioned, actually, in the Supreme Court ruling. But to sort of look differentially at products versus crude, I think one of the areas we should be asking is, what does this look like if this goes on for a few more months?
That's right.
Right. So right now, you could say there's no atheists in foxholes. There's no free marketers in a supply shock.
Okay.
And so the administration is saying, no, we're not going to block exports. We're working on the supply side. We're looking at liberalizing these cargoes, these forward-positioned sanctioned ships, and allowing them to go to markets they otherwise might not serve. But at the same time, you know, if we find that the prices keep rising intractably, and it's possible that they could, although today's news, we'll have to process that and see what the market thinks of it.
Sure.
But if you just extrapolate the crude closing price out to April 30th, you get to like 174 per barrel, thereabouts. Right? So, and then you're doing no work. Work into it with a little bit more modeling, you get somewhere between 100 and 174 based on demand elasticities. And so the high end of that range looks really high, essentially doubling the gasoline price at the pump. At that point, you have to ask, would they potentially look at products exports?
Sure, okay.
And they might.
You say there's no atheists in the foxhole. How about in the oil pits? Because traders have had a heck of a time the last couple of weeks getting their heads around this. And there was this initial thought that this will be short-lived. We're seeing through this, was the line by many analysts, and it has really felt differently over the past 24 to 48 hours. The introduction of this idea of ground troops potentially occupying Cargill, and the idea of maybe the Strait being closed for weeks, if not months more. What are you hearing when it comes to sentiment among traders, and how much darker could this get?
I think there's a lot of interest in trying to figure out the answer to that first question. Is it a short war? It's already on the edge of not a short war, even if you look at it from the perspective of stopping today.
That's right.
And it's not stopping, obviously, today if we're talking about ground troops. So I think we'll see how that discussion plays out. But even if it did stop today, it's not a short crisis at this point.
Right.
We still have that lag time to get facilities that have been shuttered back up. Today, Fadi Birol, the executive director of the IEA, was talking about 6 months for restarts of fields that shut down and facilities that shut down gracefully. Even if it were weeks instead of months, it would still be weeks. And then the damaged facilities could be much longer.
Okay, so then this supply disruption will be at least weeks or months longer, to your point, even if the conflict ends today.
Yeah, although part of the
Would
mitigation...
the market price beyond that if it saw this war end or a ceasefire in place?
Well, the market looks ahead, and so to the extent that you could say that the Strait was reopening, I think you could look at this very differently. But is the Strait going to be reopened? And I think listening to the Admiral talking about the process for reopening the Strait, that too didn't sound instantaneous to me, Joe.
$3.91 today, the average for a gallon of gas. That's the average, which means a lot of people are paying more than that, and while some are paying less, $4, I'm guessing, is around the corner. Weeks or months more of crude being shut in, or 20% being off the market, would mean what for gasoline?
Yeah, if we get to that 175, 174 number, that's essentially a made-up number. Let's be serious about this. Predicting oil prices is hard in the best of times, and price discovery is even harder in a war. But if we look at that, we're essentially doubling the pre-war price on a crude oil content basis. So closing in on a 6-handle.
A 6-handle for gasoline?
On a national average basis.
On a national average. Is there anything that the White House can do beyond releasing barrels from the SPR, which it's already done? We've knocked out the Jones Act. What else could be done on a policy level here in Washington, if anything?
Well, I think that, again, this goes to the will to intervene. And as prices rise, interventions do tend to intensify. We're already starting to see some price controls, some of them soft price controls around the world. That authority doesn't look obviously vested in the president's powers right now. But on the other hand, there's inherent Article 2 powers that could be attempted in wartime. So I think we have to look and see.
Really glad we could do this, Kevin. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Kevin Book with the prospect of $6 gasoline, the managing director at ClearView Energy Partners. Let's keep this conversation going. And coming up, Super Micro shares down hard today, plunging more than 30%. Making it the worst performer in the S&P 500. And we'll bring you the details as to why next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Super Micro announcing the resignation of its co-founder and board member just hours after he and 2 others were indicted on charges they illegally diverted high-end AI chips made by NVIDIA to, of all places, China. For the details on this story that brings us right back to export controls, we bring in Bloomberg's Mike Shepard. Shep, what do we make of this? This was something that NVIDIA said would not happen, right?
This is something that NVIDIA had said really was not an issue. Jensen Huang has repeatedly said that smuggling is just not really on the radar to the degree that so many policymakers in Washington and elsewhere have been raising. And yet we see today that from the indictment that was unsealed about 24 hours ago, that it certainly does. And we're seeing the, the fallout not only affecting Supermicro stock, but the resignation of this co-founder from the company's board, but then renewed questions about broader compliance across the industry and how companies are working to try to meet the export control restrictions that have been put in place to try to deny China access to AI chips from NVIDIA, but also from AMD as well. It is a tricky matter because it's one thing to sell to China, but if you are selling to countries in Southeast Asia and the indictment names a company, it doesn't identify it, that operates out of Southeast Asia, that was the focal point for diverting the chips in question here.
This is a company, Supermicro, that's had a pretty difficult past year with an accounting scandal that really shook a lot of people out of the stock. By the way, you might be surprised, Shep, to see it's moving higher right now in after-hours trading. So there is a bid after a huge downside move. I think it was down about 30% today. Is this a company that could be excommunicated then from the AI community? How does it move on from here?
Well, it would have to really tighten up compliance. And NVIDIA, for its part, has said it has strict compliance as its top priority, and that it works on a know your customer policy to make sure that things like this don't happen. Now, we've already seen, in addition to this co-founder's resignation from the board, Supermicro moved to add someone as an acting chief compliance officer. Okay. And this person has experience at Intl as someone who oversaw export control programs there. So the idea is that they are trying to address this. But one of the challenges really has been what happens after you make the sale to places in Southeast Asia that don't have as strict export licensing requirements as China does. For instance, sales of NVIDIA chips to Malaysia, to Thailand, and to Singapore are not subject to the same kind of licensing requirements, Joe. And that's really something that is going to reverberate here in Washington as lawmakers assess this, and even as the administration assesses this. You'll remember that a little more than a year ago, before leaving office, the Biden administration had put in place a so-called global diffusion rule that would set country-by-country caps on exports of advanced AI chips, with the idea being that, you would need licenses to a lot more countries, but also with the goal of preventing diversion like this. The Trump administration scrapped that last May and has been trying to figure out where it's going from here. Clearly, they are taking the enforcement approach very seriously. This would be the biggest enforcement action on chip export controls since we've seen them enacted in the past 3 or 4 years.
Shep, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Michael Shepard with the latest on Supermicro here. And I want to turn to a breaking news story that just dropped as we were speaking. The Pentagon press policy that removed members of the media, including representatives of Bloomberg, from the premises after they refused to sign a piece of paper that would change the rules of covering the Pentagon, has been ruled unconstitutional in a case that was brought by the New York Times. This is a pretty big deal with the headline that just turned red on the terminal. A federal judge in Washington ruling the Defense Department's press policy was illegal, striking it down as unconstitutional in this lawsuit, remembering that this policy was introduced in October. And Tony Capaccio here at Bloomberg, along with all of his colleagues from other networks and news agencies, literally had to pack up their desks and leave the premises, now leaving only a couple of news agencies, most of whom you may have never heard of and are friendly to the administration, on the premises at the Pentagon. District Judge Paul Friedman ruling the policy violated the Constitution's protections of press freedom and due process under the First and Fifth Amendments. And this is something that we will, of course, be looking to hear more for, and what the response will be to news agencies like the New York Times that brought this suit and may potentially now be moving back into the building. We have much more to follow here with breaking news from the president as well. Just a few moments ago, posting, quote, "We are getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East with respect to the terrorist regime of Iran. He then goes on to list a number of objectives reached before writing, quote, the Hormuz Strait will have to be guarded and policed as necessary by other nations who use it. The U.S., he writes, does not, if asked, will help these countries in their Hormuz efforts. Joining us now with his insight, Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And Aaron, I'll apologize since most of this broke since you were on the line with us here. Is this the end of our military effort in Iran?
On the contrary, and Joe, thanks for having me. I really love Bloomberg. No, I think actually we are now in a transitional phase from a war of choice to a war of necessity. And I think when the Iranians began their horizontal escalation and put at risk Gulf states' interests, and essentially, they haven't mined the straits, but they've essentially created enough uncertainty where anyone's tankers that they don't approve of, the Indians are through, the Chinese are through, will be blocked. Essentially, we now have not just a confrontation between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. We have an international crisis to global oil, global economy. And I think, I'm not sure where the president is going with this, but I think we have weeks, if not months, of military deployments still in train. 2,500 Marines are en route from the Asia Pacific. There's talk now of significant talk of providing options to Ceasefire Island, which is the major export facility, 8 kilometers long, maybe 15 miles off the coast of Iran. And then you have the major problem of the Straits. How the president could wind this war down and basically say we've won, leaving the Iranians with the capacity to turn on and off global oil traffic, to me is extraordinary. It will not be a victory. Tactically, we've undermined Iran's capacity to project its power abroad, but you've left the regime in place with a stranglehold, a chokehold over the world economy. That's not a victory, and that's not an accomplishment now of the president's goals.
Well, as the president teases this idea of winding down our military efforts, it reminds us of the competing objectives that we could be presented with and have already seen some glimpses of between the U.S. and Israel. Aaron, I'm curious where your thoughts are on this, because there's been this conventional wisdom that the U.S. at some point achieves what it wants to, packs up its toys and leaves Israel to continue prosecuting its war. A lot of folks think that that would be impossible, that as long as Israel is intent on bombing or fighting with Iran, the U.S. will have to stay in the region. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I'll give you the bottom line here, Joe. I've worked for administrations from Jimmy Carter to Bush 43, and I'd throw in Obama and Biden. No American president that I worked for has more leverage over an Israeli prime minister that Donald Trump has over Benjamin Netanyahu, because Netanyahu's core objectives this year is to get reelected. It's not Iran, it's not Lebanon, it's not Gaza. It's getting reelected. He needs the president of the United States in sync and campaigning for him actively. So when Donald Trump decides, if he decides that the war is over, he'll pick up the phone and he'll call his good friend Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's going to say it's time to stop. And Netanyahu will have absolutely no other recourse but to stop. Lebanon might be a different story, but clearly there'll be no prosecution of Israel's war against Iran once the Trump administration decides that it's over. It's just we're a long way away from that happening.
You wonder how much of this rhetoric is simply a shell game, Aaron. We've seen the president suggest before, ahead of the Operation Midnight Hammer, that there were 2 weeks to follow, and then, of course, the jets were in the air. We know that there are a couple of amphibious ships that have already left California and other areas, including the South China Sea, steaming their way right now to the region with the idea potentially of occupying Karg Island. Does that sound like a war that's winding down, or is the president trying to take our eye off the ball?
I think it's PSYOPs, psychological operation. The president did this, correctly pointed out before Midnight Hammer. He did it again when he basically said that our technical talks between the U.S. and Iran were to resume in Geneva, and he was sending Marco Rubio to Israel on a Monday. Well, the war started on Saturday. No, he's quite capable of creating this sort of distraction and deflection. Look, the major problem, major challenge now is we're going from standoff strikes, B-52s, B-2s, Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles, to actually putting assets, men and women and American equipment in the theater of operation where they will be under any potential circumstances, taking Kharg Island, occupying the coastal areas along the Straits of Hormuz, a tanker war where the U.S. escorts tankers, which is going to require an extraordinary amount of military hardware. We're putting our assets now at risk. So far from retreating, far from getting out, we're in, I would argue, for weeks more of this, Joe. Weeks, if not longer.
Are you expecting troops on Kharg Island tomorrow morning then? Would you be surprised?
Wouldn't surprise me if Israeli and American troops showed up in Isfahan trying to figure out where those 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium is in 18 to 30 scuba-sized tanks. But those must be buried deep underground. If we're going to get those tanks, you're going to have to plant yourself there. You're going to need earth movers. You're going to need to dig. You're going to need to secure that area. Kharg Island is risky, but probably doable. The HEU rescue operation, I think, is probably more complicated. The point is, Joe, we're there, boots on the ground, ships in the sea, aircraft in the air. We're going to be there for quite some time.
Wow. Aaron, David Miller on Bloomberg. I'll have to ask you about this breaking news in a Pentagon press policy that was just ruled unconstitutional. I know this isn't your focus, Aaron, but as someone, to your point, who has spent time in many administrations, what do you think of this? Will reporters be moving back in?
I think this is extraordinary. It's great for Bloomberg. It's great for the New York Times. It's great for the free press. And it's another indication that, in fact, in this republic, there are really still, through the courts, constraints on what is clearly a extraordinary aggrandizement of presidential power. So it's a good day for Bloomberg and a good day for the free press.
Well, that's nice to hear. I suspect that'll be based on an appeal by the administration, but at some point, maybe we will see working journalists back in the building at the Pentagon, huh?
I hope so.
Aaron David Miller, thank you for joining, as always. Senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And we'll see what happens, of course, this weekend. Pierre Poilievre, Canada's opposition leader, sat down with Bloomberg's David Gura to discuss trade with the U.S. Poilievre addressing President Trump's trade policies and concerns about American jobs. Here's a piece of that conversation.
I understand his argument that American jobs have been outsourced to places like China. There are literally cases of American factories closing so that Chinese factories can open. That doesn't happen with Canada. Our role in the American economy is to supply the goods for production.
You can catch that full conversation with Canada's opposition leader on Bloomberg this weekend, 7 a.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, Colombia's president being scrutinized as a U.S. drug trafficking probe gets underway. We'll bring you the latest details coming up next on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio. Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us. In tonight's Power Brief, the U.S. Justice Department says it's currently investigating the president of Colombia over potential ties to drug traffickers. According to a new report, the New York Times writing, investigators from 2 U.S. federal prosecutors' offices are investigating President Gustavo Petro of Colombia, according to 3 people with knowledge of the matter. The investigations are being run separately out of the U.S. attorney's offices in Manhattan and Brooklyn and are focusing on alleged meetings Petro had with drug traffickers and whether his campaign solicited donations. President Trump has previously clashed with Petro, but the Times writes there is nothing to indicate the White House had a role in initiating either investigation. A federal commission has approved the design for a 24-karat gold coin featuring President Trump for America's 250th birthday. The U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, which includes members appointed by the president, cleared the way for the U.S. Mint to begin production of the coin, which for those joining on Bloomberg TV and YouTube shows Trump with the years 1776 and 2026 around the president. He's got two fists on the table, grimacing at you. Now federal law says no living president can appear on U.S. currency, but the Treasury Department says it has the authority to approve the minting of certain coins like this. And some breaking news. A San Francisco jury just moments ago finding Elon Musk defrauded Twitter investors before his buyout in 2022 in an effort to buy the social media platform for a lower price than his original $44 billion bid. Jurors in federal court finding Musk intentionally misled Twitter shareholders when he tweeted that the social network, of course called X now, had too many fake accounts, tried to back out of the deal. Musk did not immediately respond to a request for comment. We turn to our panel now with a lot to talk about and news that has broken since this hour began. Bloomberg Politics contributor and Democratic analyst Jeannie Sheehan Zaino is with us, Democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, senior vice president at Rock Solutions, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. It's great to see you both. And welcome. Jeannie, we just had a flurry of news, and I'm going to start with what we heard from the president himself with regard to the war in Iran. And this is just moments after he told reporters in the driveway at the White House he was not interested in a ceasefire, saying on Truth Social, "We're getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our military efforts in the Middle East with respect to the terrorist regime of Iran." Is he simply trying to soothe the markets right now, Jeannie, or is this about to end?
He must be trying to soothe the markets because by his own calculation and his own statements, we were supposed to have regime change, end of the nuclear program, end of the ballistic missile program, and removal of support of the proxies. None of that has happened. Instead of what has happened, the Strait of Hormuz has been closed. We have a more hardline Ayatollah in place. The regime is more entrenched, and certainly Hezbollah, Hamas, those are all still maintained. And they have 900 pounds of enriched uranium sitting under a mountain and a ballistic missiles program that they can continue to build. So the president, for him to suggest that we have met objectives, I would ask him, what objectives has he met? Because the ones that have been stated, those have clearly not been met.
Well, I'll tell you, Lisa, he said more than that. It's a pretty long post, in fact. The Hormuz Strait, he writes, will have to be guarded and policed as necessary by other nations who use it. The United States does not. If asked, will help these countries in their Hormuz efforts. Are we about to leave the region, Lisa? How are you reading this?
Well, I mean, we just listened to an expert tell us that that is super unlikely. I think the thing, though, that's different here is that the president himself is trying to signal to audiences around the globe, including those who are paying attention to the markets, that things are changing, action has happened, and benefits have been made, even though Jeannie states all the facts that demonstrate perhaps that's not the case. I think what's interesting, though, is that the president is trying to signal like he does on Truth Social. A lot of people are paying attention, and I think he's had a lot of success in using that as the bully pulpit as it relates to how people react to what's happening, not only in the U.S., but overseas.
Well, we're having a conversation about the potential for ground troops here, Jeannie. We've been talking about it for several days on Bloomberg TV and radio. Carg Island, which you can see on your screen if you're watching on Bloomberg TV, would be the most likely opportunity here for troops to seize this island just 15 miles off the coast and essentially take Iran's energy industry hostage, a blockade of sorts, to pressure Iran into reopening the strait. Is this something that you see happening? Jeannie, the president wouldn't address it today when he was asked by reporters. He said, I wouldn't tell you even if I did know.
It could very well happen, which is astonishing considering just a few moments ago, as you just mentioned, he said, we are almost out. This thing is almost done. And yet we have, 21, 22, 2,500 Marines heading over there. Nobody has a sense as to why, what the mission is, what they're going to be doing, what the end game is here. There's a few possibilities. Carg Island is one, but by all accounts, getting in there is difficult. Once you get in there, how long are we going to hold this ground? Is the United States going to set up their permanently? Are we going to put our U.S. men and women in harm's way that way? Are we going to go in and have them get that uranium? I mean, the mission here is very unclear. And this is the problem from the start. The president has yet to articulate what he is doing here and what our interest is. So we are all just sort of following this ping pong of a moving ball as the president one day says we're out, one day says we're in, and we have no clarity. I'm not sure how he's going to soothe the markets or, quite frankly, anything else with this kind of uncertainty.
Well, look, it's unclear, obviously, what's going to happen, Lisa, but there might be reporters in the Pentagon to tell us, as a federal judge in Washington rules that the Defense Department new press policy that sent reporters from news agencies around the world to the door is unconstitutional. This is the one that stated the Pentagon could revoke credentials of any journalist who solicited information that the department did not authorize for release, including unclassified information. Lisa, I'm sure there's an appeal coming from the administration, but will this end with journalists back in the building?
I certainly think so. I mean, there has to be a way that there's some set of balance. But what's interesting about what Jeannie just said, what we just saw with the president, this feels a lot like the conversation we were happening when we were talking about Iraq. And the Democrats were questioning whether or not George W. Bush had offered enough information about what was happening. What I think we've lost sight of is the fact that these are incredibly delicate situations. There is not a lot of information that can not be shared widely, really anywhere. And so the balance here, from someone who has advocated for media for as long as I've been in this business, I am in favor of journalists having access to that information, but I am sensitive to the fact that leaks and information that is beyond what should be shared is of utmost concern when the Pentagon is engaged in this high level of engagement in the Middle East.
Well, you know, the fact of the matter is, Jeannie, and if you look at the headlines, it's pretty clear that reporters have been breaking more scoops about the Pentagon since they were shown the door. What will it mean for them to get back inside?
Yeah, hallelujah. This is great news for reporting. It's great news for the American public, for the First Amendment. But I'll tell you who wins the most, to your point, is the Pentagon and Pete Hegseth. If he thought that this policy, well before we went into Iran, by the way, this was October, if this policy was going to yield him much more positive news coverage, of course, he had another thing coming. So I think Pete Hegseth should welcome them back, throw a little party, and try to do what all people in government do, is try to work with the media. It's the fourth estate of government. It's a requirement for a democracy. We need it, and we need information, certainly to Lisa's point, not classified, but we need information because no one person or group gets to decide what happens in a democracy.
I just want to see Bloomberg's Tony Capaccio back on the beat. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Lisa Cammuso-Miller, thank you both so much. And have a great weekend. It could be a newsy one. And make sure to tune into a brand new Wall Street Week coming up next, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, with my colleague David Weston on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you for joining us. We covered a lot of ground today and glad to have you with us. I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee will be back on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. This is Bloomberg.